Well, last week we started this series in Ecclesiastes called Life Under the Sun, and we started to talk about what it means to ask ourselves one of the most important questions that you can in this life is, what is the meaning of life? What am I doing here? What am I living for? Is what Ecclesiastes is all about. And so ultimately what we saw last week, in a nutshell, the whole sermon, the whole 40-minute sermon in one sentence, basically everything is worthless, is what the author of Ecclesiastes taught us last week, that everything under the sun, life under the sun, is worthless if we're not living it for God. And so over the next 2 weeks, this week and next week, we're going to be diving into two different examples, two different kinds of people that are searching for meaning. And I would beg to say that there are two different kinds of people here in this room that the author of Ecclesiastes is going to address this week and next week. There are two people in this room. There are some people in this room that love to follow the rules, that love to please their parents, that love to please other people, that love to please their leaders maybe. They're moral, you're smart, maybe you get good grades, you do good things. If you ask someone at school, are you a good person? They would say, oh yeah, you are a moral, upstanding citizen. You are a good person. Then there's another group of people, voice crack, here in this room, that when you go to school, you try to fit in. You try to fit in with your school, with your friends from school. You try to talk the way that they talk. You try to do the things that they do, so that on Wednesday, you put on one picture of who you are, and then you go to school and you look different. You're trying to go into the world to taste and to see if the world will satisfy you and fulfill you in ways that it promises. Being cool, being popular, having pleasure. And so we'll look at that next week. But this week, I want to focus in on that first person that I just mentioned, the rule follower, the moral church kid, the smart, you're getting good grades. Most people at your school would say that you are a good church kid. And ultimately what the author of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, is going to teach us tonight is that you pursuing those things all is vanity. It is worthless, is what the author of Ecclesiastes is going to teach us tonight. So I'd love for you guys to open up back to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and we're going to be covering a lot of ground today. If you look on your worksheets, we're covering a section in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and then we're covering a section in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Next week, we'll hit the little section in the middle, Ecclesiastes 2, 1 to 11, but tonight we're going to start in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 12, as we are going to search for the meaning of life, as we're going to try to answer this question right here, what are you living for? To those in this room that are living for good grades, are living for people-pleasing, are living for your leader to think you are a good person, and people at school would say, oh, that's a moral church kid. Solomon here is going to teach you tonight that pursuit without God is worthless and is meaningless, and you'll find no ultimate meaning or fulfillment in it. So let's redirect our search for meaning in God and not in just doing good things. So Ecclesiastes chapter 1, let's start by just looking at verse 12 through 18, and then we'll break down the other sections as we get there, because we're covering a lot of text tonight. And it's going to, over the course of the series, and tonight as well, when I read it, the first time I read it, it is going to not make sense to a lot of you. So, I just want you to hang in there when you read it, or when I read it, and you're like, man, I don't know what you just said. What does that mean? That's why we're studying this book, because I'm going to hopefully be able to help you understand the wisdom that is here in this text. So, last week we learned that everything is worthless, and specifically now he's going to address the goody two-shoes person here in the room. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, look at verse 12. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I have applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, all that is done under the sun. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all those who were over Jerusalem before me. In my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this is all but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases sorrow. So he begins here to basically confront the person that is pursuing wisdom. And at first reading, you say, wait a minute, that does not seem right. I thought the Bible was all about wisdom. I thought wisdom was a good thing. Well, he's trying to describe a pursuit of wisdom here that takes God out of the equation. An earthly wisdom, a seeking knowledge. So last week we talked about everything being worthless. He says right here, wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of knowledge and intellect, and filling your mind with good things oftentimes. It is a worthless pursuit if you're doing it without God. So if you know anything about Solomon, you know that he was the wisest man to ever live. So we see that right in verse 12. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. So this is one of the verses in the book that kind of shows us who we're talking about here. It says that he's also been the wisest. Verse 16, he's acquired more great wisdom, surpassing all of those in Jerusalem before him. So this is most likely Solomon here. And if you know anything about Solomon, he was the wisest person on the planet because what God did, you can write down 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings chapter 3, God says you can have anything that you want, Solomon. Anything that you want. And he had just become king in Israel, and he said, the one thing that I want wisdom. I want insight to help lead the people of Israel. And so God is very pleased with it. 1 Kings chapter 4, it explains it a little bit more. 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29 through 30, it says, And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond all measure, and the breadth of mind like sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. So what he did here is he asked for wisdom, and God gave it to him, and he made Solomon the wisest person to ever live. Okay, wisdom, I thought that was supposed to be a good thing. And for those of you that were there at church on Sunday, and I preached about wisdom and said, pursue it, pray for it. Orient your life to pursue more and more wisdom. How does this make sense here? What is he saying? I want you to think of wisdom in two different categories here. The wisdom I talked about on Sunday in the main service was a wisdom, a godly wisdom, in which you as a Christian pursues wisdom from God so that you can obey God and please God. It is all God-centered wisdom. To know things, to know right and wrong, so that you can obey God and please Him and glorify Him. This type of wisdom is talking about basically you filling your head with knowledge. Filling your head with knowledge, intellect, you could say. Earthly wisdom, making insightful decisions, being successful, if you will, acquiring wisdom and knowledge. To be a smart person doesn't mean that you are a Christian. To be a Christian doesn't necessarily mean that you're a smart person. But there are lots of smart people in this world that have a lot of earthly wisdom that are not going to go to heaven when they die. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. He's pursuing this type of wisdom without God. And some of you in this room are pursuing this type of earthly wisdom in your life, whether you realize it or whether you don't realize it. You're trying to acquire knowledge. You're trying to learn so that you could be a really successful person. Is that a bad thing to know things, to be smart? No, that's not a bad thing. But ultimately, some of you are trying to be know-it-alls. And so what this text here is telling us is that we need to stop doing that. So write it down this way for point number one. Take a note. Stop trying to be a know-it-all. Stop trying to be a know-it-all. This person here that Solomon is talking about, he's talking about himself here, so it's kind of an autobiography. He's saying that he sought out wisdom, earthly wisdom, to understand everything under heaven. Verse 13, he says, I applied my heart to seek and search out wisdom, that all that is done under heaven. And he says, it is an unhappy business that God has given the children of man to be busy with. For I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, striving after the wind. He was trying to know everything about everything and about anything under the sun. This earthly type of wisdom. He has godly wisdom at the beginning. He does seek God, but then if you know the story of Solomon, by the end of his life, he's married thousands of women from from different civilizations, and he's turned his heart away from God. I believe that he wrote Ecclesiastes at the end of his life when he repented from that, but here he's talking about someone that's trying to just know everything about everything. Probably sitting here like, oh, I don't know about me being a know-it-all. I don't really think that I'm a know-it-all. Well, I want you to really assess the way that you even pursue the pursuit of knowledge. And knowledge, I use that in a general sense. At school, in your life, and not necessarily how high is your GPA, that's not really what I'm trying to communicate here, but how are you pursuing wisdom? Because what he says here, if you look at verse 15, this person that has pursued their whole life for this earthly type of wisdom, verse 15 says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So he's learned everything, he's trying to learn everything about everything, and he says, I'm understanding that the world is unfixable. Man cannot fix the problems of this world. And if you look right now at our world, there's a lot of people trying to fix a lot of problems. Good problems, like cancer and sickness and disease and these technological things to make our lives easier and better. And those are not necessarily bad things per se, but the idea is that this world, right here, verse 15, is broken. It is crooked, and it cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. Earthly wisdom cannot fix the world. So subpoint A, under point number 1, write it down this way. Earthly wisdom does not fix the world. Earthly wisdom does not and cannot fix the world. I want you to imagine right now being the smartest person in the world. And I'm sure not everyone in this room wants to be the smartest person in the world, but I'm sure there are some people in this room that do want to be the smartest person in the world. Imagine right now being the smartest person in the world. What can you do as the smartest person in the world? What are you going to accomplish? What's the end result? What's going to happen? Are you going to change the world? Write down 1 Corinthians 8:1. It says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Kind of gives us this picture of knowledge and how important it really is. Is it good to be smart? Yeah, sure. Is that the ultimate end of this life, is to be the smartest person in the world? No, it's not. I don't want to be the smartest person in the world, but I do want to be smart. I want to get really good grades, and I'm going to orient my whole life to get straight A's so that I can make it to this honors class, or I can make it to this AP class, so that when I get all my transcripts and I go to college, I can go to one of these very fancy schools, these really smart schools. I want to go to Stanford or USC or UCLA or Harvard or Yale or UCI or MIT or Cal Berkeley, or I want to go overseas and I want to go Oxford or Cambridge or something like that. You want to be smart. You want to buy yourself a sweatshirt at one of these schools that says, hey, look at me, I go to USC. Hey, look at me, I go to Harvard. And that is what you are focused in life. Solomon says what you're doing is worthless, because ultimately what is crooked cannot be made straight. You cannot change the world, which is something that your schools say the opposite of you can change the world. You're a world changer. You starts with you, right? Maybe you've heard this quote before from Gandhi. You must be the change that you wish to see in the world. I saw there's this kid's book that's called You Can Change the World, The Kid's Guide to a Better Planet. You can do it. You can change the world. Verse 15 of Ecclesiastes chapter 1 says, no, you can't. No, you can't. The world is broken and crooked. It is cursed. You know the story of Adam and Eve, when God cursed man, he cursed woman, he cursed the snake, and he cursed the world. Genesis chapter 3 verse 19 says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, and for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The world is cursed. We are cursed. It is getting worse. We cannot fix the world. He says, verse 16, that he's been successful in this pursuit of wisdom. He says, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all of those in Jerusalem. My heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. I knew everything. I'm the smartest guy on the planet. Verse 17, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceived that it was all striving after the wind. It says, for in much wisdom was much vexation. He who increases knowledge increases in sorrow. I've pursued this, and ultimately, the more I know, the more depressed I am, the more sad I am. Verse 17, it says that ultimately this is all a waste. It's a striving after the one. You can never grab it. You can never reach it. You can never grab hold of it. The more wisdom he has, the more knowledge he has, it says that his life is worse. He's in much vexation, increasing in sorrow. He tries to be the smartest person in the world. And he was. Verse 16 says he was. He says, even that, be the smartest person in the world. I could go to one of these schools. I could go to Stanford. And just think, like, what good does that do for you? I remember going back to my high school years, I remember Stanford was like the gold standard. Like, that was where everyone wanted to go. Stanford, I think, has like I just looked up the other day, like an acceptance rate of, it's like 3% or something like that. 3% of applicants can get in Stanford, which is just baffling. And only smart people apply to Stanford. So that's 3% of smart people get into Stanford, which is crazy. I think Harvard's like 5% or maybe something like that. So it's not very much higher. My school, my Bible school, it was 95% acceptance rate. So just so that you know, if you want to try to get into a school, 95% was my school. But anyway, you think, to buy the Stanford sweatshirt and to be able to say, I went to Stanford, and to put that on my LinkedIn one day, and to walk around and post pictures and Instagrams of me on my smart campus, what good is that really going to do for your life? Is that going to fulfill you? Is that going to give you satisfaction? What impact is that person making? I remember the people at my school, I remember there was one girl in our graduating class. There was only one girl that made it into Stanford. That was what everyone wanted to, everyone was applying to UCLA and USC and everything. One girl got into Stanford. I couldn't tell you what impact she's made in this world. Nothing. Negligible. Like, sincerely, your leaders right now are making a bigger impact than she is in this world. And your leaders, I would beg to say, are not the smartest people in the world. I love them. So I'm not the smartest person in the world. We're not. But what I'm saying is the impact. Look at the impact. Look at the impact that the smartest person in the world can make. And then someone that just devotes their Wednesday nights to help junior high and high school students understand the Word of God. The impact of their life versus the impact of the smartest person in the world. The girl that got into Stanford. What is the payoff? Really, truly, what's the payoff? Is it fun to go to Stanford? Are you a non-Christian if you go to Stanford? No, I'm not saying that at all. Do not miss the point. But what I am saying is that will not satisfy you. That will not fulfill you. No matter how much you think it will pay off for you, it says that you can't fix anything. Verse 15, the world is already crooked. And it's verse 18, the more you know, the more sad you're going to be. Which is just very interesting there. So he tests his heart to try to be the wisest person. We're going to get to this section at the beginning of chapter 2 next week to talk about the pleasures, the self-indulgence that he had. Talk to the different crowd of people in this room. But I want you to skip your eyes down to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Look at verse 12 here with me. Ecclesiastes 2:12. He kind of talks a little bit more about wisdom and kind of the end result of wisdom. Ecclesiastes 2:12 says, so I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there was more gain in wisdom than there was in folly, as there was more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive the same events happen to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I also been very wise? And I said in my heart, that is also vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have long been forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity, and a striving after the wind. In a nutshell, what he's saying here is that the wise person, the smartest person in the world, and the fool, the stupidest person in the world, the same thing happens to both of them. They both die. They both die. There's an expiration date to this pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. So write down this way for subpoint B. Earthly wisdom expires. Earthly wisdom expires. He's teaching us a lesson here about the certainty of death. The smartest person and the dumbest person in the world, they both die. Going back to that question of what are you living for? What are you living for? Living to gain as much knowledge as you can? Living for something that ultimately will not last. Will not last. We're all going to die. I just read that from Genesis chapter 3. For you are made of dust, and to dust you shall return. The wisest person and the dumbest person. Verse 14, he says that the wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive the same events happen to all of them. Basically what he's saying here is, yeah, it's better to be wise than to be dumb, is what he says. It's better to have your eyes than to not have your eyes, which is just a funny way to say it. But he says the same events happen to all of them. The end of verse 16, how the wise dies just like the fool. To live for wisdom, to live for knowledge, to live for intellect, to live for the great school and the great job and the great LinkedIn profile one day, successful career, you're living for something that is going to not pan out. And I'm sure we're going to use this illustration, truthfully, all throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, but I'll introduce it now. It's like truthfully living your whole life for monopoly money. Spending all of your attention, all of your effort in your life for monopoly money. Monopoly money, when you play Monopoly, that money has value. It has value for a while, because Monopoly lasts a long time. It has value, but when the game is over, those go from valuable pieces of a game to paper. They're meaningless. They're nothing. There's an expiration date to that piece of Monopoly money. It's not going to actually pan out. The value of it is going to expire. And so ultimately, when you live your life for wisdom, when you live your life for money, when you live your life for pleasure, whatever the case may be, fill in the blank. When you live your life for those things, you're living your life for monopoly money. It is going to expire, and you're not going to be able to use it anymore. Maybe you experienced that when you graduated from 6th grade. You got Bible bucks. Those Bible bucks mean nothing now. You can't go back and spend your Bible bucks. They're done. They're worthless. They're pieces of paper that you have to pass down to your younger siblings. That's all it is. It's nothing. You can't spend it anymore. It's interesting, though, that he does say it's better that you're wise than if you're a fool. So he's saying, for you person that is feeling really discouraged, you're like, I shouldn't even do my homework tonight because I guess my grades don't matter, my future school doesn't matter. Again, don't mishear me. It is saying that it is good to be wiser than to not be wise. But when you make that your ultimate end, when being wise, being knowledgeable, being intellectual, when that becomes your God, you will experience nothing, worthlessness. What about my grades? Do my grades matter at all? To answer that question, I would say yes they do, and no they don't. Yes they do in the sense of you should try to get good grades. Straight up, you should. It's better to have good grades than to not have good grades. It's better to try and to do your homework and to study for your tests and to do well on those tests. It's better for you to do that. But if your life is wrapped around the anxiousness of my grades and you cannot bear the fact that it says A- and not A, and what am I going to do with my life with this GPA that goes from 4.0 to 4.3999999? Worthless is what he says. Ultimately, what's the difference? And he says, verse 17, look at the frustration that he has. He says, I hated my life, and because of what was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all his vanity, striving after the wind. It's like him looking back at freaking out about an A- and saying, man, what was I doing? What was I doing? What a waste. It was vanity, striving after the wind. Would it have been better to get an A than an A-? Sure. But if that was my God, it doesn't matter. So what should I do instead? He says this is worthless. Should I not get good grades? No, you should. So don't, when you get in the car tonight, parents say, what did you learn tonight? Don't tell them, Pastor Matt said my grades no longer matter. I'm not going to do my homework tonight. I'm not going to study for my testimony. Don't say that, okay? Don't say that. If you do say that, I'm going to send your parents like the clip that says me saying the opposite of, no, I did not say that. What I am saying is when that becomes your God, that's when we have problems. And ultimately, this is what you should do instead. Write it down this way for subpoint C. Seek the right kind of wisdom. This earthly wisdom, it expires. This earthly wisdom is not going to ultimately fix the world. You can't change the world, is what Ecclesiastes says. So, what should you do? Seek the right kind of wisdom. So when you do go home and you have a big test to study for, you've got homework to do, I want you to, instead of thinking, this is now the most important thing in the world for me to get an A, not an A-, to thinking this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31, it says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. What is your heart motivation behind your homework, behind your test studying, behind the work ethic that you have? To do it all for the glory of God. Not to make it your God. So you got to seek the right kind of wisdom. The type of wisdom that I did talk about on Sunday. Pursuing the type of wisdom that allows you to know what God's will is, to know what is right in a godly, righteous, holy sense, and then to be able to have the ability to do it. That's why we do sermons. That's why we do small groups. That's why your leaders check in with you. That's why they text you, hey, did you read your Bible? So that you can stop sinning. Like, that's why they care about you, because that kind of wisdom, it matters. Godly wisdom, not earthly wisdom. We don't have time to turn there, but you could write down Proverbs 2, 1 through 5. Proverbs 2, 1 through 5 talks about the value of wisdom, how important it is that if you are a Christian, you're pursuing godly wisdom. You're seeking it like silver. God wants you to pursue this type of wisdom so that you can obey Him, so that you can fear Him. He says that wisdom is the beginning of the fear of the Lord. Solomon, what he's doing is he's correcting you about the limits of earthly wisdom, how far you can go with earthly wisdom. This is my text last week, but James chapter 1, verse 5. James chapter 1, verse 5. This is very clear. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. You as a Christian should pursue this type of wisdom, godly wisdom. God, help me know your will. Help me know what you want me to do, to obey you, and help me, give me the ability to do it. Praying for that type of wisdom is different than praying for an A+ or praying to get a yes from Stanford. Being the smartest person in your school doesn't pay off, but being someone that orients their life to seek the wisdom of God so that you can obey God and please God, that will pay off. Really, that's what's so cool, I think, about the book of Ecclesiastes. It shows you what doesn't matter so that you can really see crystal clear eyes of what does matter. To pursue this type of wisdom or intellect is worthless. He goes on to talk here in verse 18. If you look back at Ecclesiastes 2, verse 18, talks a little bit about something else that he's trying to see if he can find meaning in. Verse 18, Ecclesiastes 2:18, he says, I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. So now he's trying work. He's trying success, or earthly success in terms of work and accomplishment. Verse 19 says, and who knows whether he will be a wise or a fool? Yet he will be a master of all who toiled, or which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. This is also vanity. So I turned about, and I gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also vanity and a great evil. For what has a man from all toil and striving of the heart, with which he toils beneath the sun? For all of his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. Now what Solomon is trying to address here is he's trying to address that, okay, I tried to be the smartest person in the world. Now I'm going to be the person that works harder than everyone else and be the most successful worker in the world. And ultimately what he says is to work and to be successful, even that doesn't pay off. So write down this way for point number two. Point number two, work for a lasting paycheck. Work for a lasting paycheck. His frustration here is that he was working for something that expired. It was temporary. He gets frustrated that this doesn't last. He has this picture here of being so successful, and then when he dies, he's got to pass it on to someone else that didn't work. You can picture an inheritance. A really rich millionaire, billionaire dies. They've done so much work in their life, so much success, and then they give their kids a large inheritance for sitting around doing nothing. And he's saying, ultimately, that's what earthly success and work does. You're going to build up some big bank account one day if you think that this is going to fulfill you. And you're going to have all this money and saved up in this giant inheritance, and then you're just going to give it to your kids who didn't earn it. You earned it. Maybe you've got a rich grandparent or a rich parent or whatever, and they die, you're just going to get a big chunk of change, a lot of stuff. And he's saying here how frustrating that is to spend my whole life working for something and then just give it to someone else. He says, verse 21, must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This person gets something out of me that they didn't work for. So write it in this way for subpoint A, earthly success expires. Similar to earthly wisdom expires, earthly success also expires. It's very temporary. He cannot keep it forever. His success, his riches are passed on to the next guy, his children. And ultimately, ask yourself the question right now, what can you do in this life, in a material way, that you can bring to eternity? The Bible says you can't even bring your clothes to eternity, let alone your money or your stuff. Job says, naked I came into the world, and naked I will go out. I can't even bring anything with me. Over the summer, we looked at Luke chapter 16, Luke 16, 19 through 32, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Remember that story? Lazarus was that poor man, the beggar outside the gate. Rich man, he was feasting lavishly inside. They both die. Rich man goes to hell. Lazarus goes to heaven. And it was this beautiful picture of don't trade the temporary for the eternal. Don't live your life for this world when ultimately you're going to die and spend eternity in the next. James 4:14 says, you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. It's that idea of vanity, of hevel. Reflect on your life right now. Are you living for the temporary or are you living for the eternal? What are you trying to find right now your satisfaction in, your worth, your value in? Maybe you're dissatisfied. Maybe you're depressed is what this text says. He hates his life. He's working in full sorrow. Look at verse 23. All my days are full of sorrow, and my work is vexation. Not to go on too far of a tangent here, but you see this picture of depression here. Why is he depressed? Because he has got his life, his focus, all nearsighted to this life. That's the only thing that matters. Ultimately, what's the answer? The answer is not working for a paycheck that expires and that will not last, but ultimately to work for a paycheck that is eternal, that does last. Go right down for subpoint B. Maintain, instead of working for a lasting or working for a temporary paycheck, an earthly success that expires. Subpoint B. Maintain an eternal perspective. Instead of worrying about the things of this world, making that your ultimate goal in life. Make your ultimate goal in life to please God for the next life. And when you're done writing that down, you can turn over to Matthew chapter 6 with me. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. I foresee us going to this text many times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes because it's so helpful for us. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Also, as we go through the series and you're turning to different texts, make sure to keep a bookmark in Ecclesiastes, because I know how hard it is for some of you to find. Keep a bookmark there so that you can keep going back and forth. Word to the wise. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where are you storing up your treasure right now? Are you storing up your treasure for this life? Your success, your grades, your future? Your worth is in the things that you do in this life, satisfaction here. Or are you storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust don't destroy them, where thieves don't break in and steal? And then I love what verse 21 says. This is the verse that we always forget about in this little section here. Don't miss it. Verse 21, Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. Look at it with me. It says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What he's saying here is what you value. If you value the things of this life or the things of the next life, that's where your heart, that's where your life, that's where your effort, your attention, everything you are in this life, that's the direction of where it'll be. Where your treasure is, what you value the most, this earth or the next one, is where your heart, where you will be focused on. It's a quote from a poem back in the 1900s by this guy named C.T. Studd, which is a cool name. I wish my last name was Studd. This is what he says. I thought this was so well put. He says, you have only one life, and it will soon be past. But only what is done for Christ will last. Very pithy way, very poetic, rhyming way to say, the things that you do on this planet, if they are not for God, they're not for Christ, they will burn up and they will not last. They will not last. You have only one life, and it soon will pass, and only what is done for Christ will last. It's really ultimately the whole point of Ecclesiastes. If you look back there at the end of chapter 2, it gives us another solution, a different solution, a solution that will help you go to school and put the right perspective and the right attention and priority on your schoolwork, on your grades, on your future. Look at what he says, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. He says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in all of his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or have, who can have this enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This is vanity. This is also vanity, a striving after the wind. He gives us a solution here in the interim, in the temporary. What can I do now on this planet? Ultimately, you told me to store for myself treasures in heaven. Well, yeah, what do I do here? Point number 3, write it down this way. Joyfully appreciate God's generous gifts. Joyfully appreciate God's generous gifts. This sounds so different from everything he's just said. He's just corrected us from going too far, from desiring things too much, from making the gifts that God has given us our ultimate gods, and to use a biblical word, our idols. But see, God has given us blessing so that we can ultimately give him glory for it, to give him thanks for it. So all throughout the last 2 chapters that we just studied, that everything is worthless. What he's saying is everything is worthless when you make those the ultimate end, when you make those your God, when you idolize them. So for subpoint A, you can write it down this way. Don't idolize his gifts. Don't idolize his gifts. That's what he's been referring to throughout this chapter. Because now he's telling you to enjoy them. Wait a minute, you just said that they're worthless. Why are you now telling me to enjoy them? Well, what he was telling you earlier is that if you make them your idol, you are going to be sorely disappointed. What is an idol? An idol is placing something above God, making it your ultimate priority. And what does Jesus say is the most important, the greatest commandment in the law? Matthew 22, 37 through 38. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the great and first commandment. To do anything other than that is to break the first commandment. To put something above God. To make your grades more important than God. To make your earthly success more important than God. you are not loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, or with all of your soul, or with all of your mind. Don't take the good gifts that God has given you and make them more important than God, caring about them more than you care about God. It's kind of like your phones. Okay? Your parents give you a phone. Maybe that's not a perfect illustration, but your parents give you a phone. They pay for it. They buy it for you, and then they pay the monthly bill for you to have a phone. What does a normal teenager do? They care about their phone more than they care about their parents. Take a step back from that. And I'm not trying to confront you for being on your phone for so long. That's a different sermon, which we can do that some other time if you want. I'm on my phone a lot too, by the way. But your parents, they buy you your phone, they give you your phone, and then you obsess over your phone. I remember living at home, and my dad bought me a phone. He paid for my phone bill every month, and he'd be like, "Gotta get off your phone. Get off your phone. Like, you're just addicted to it. What's your problem?" And I would say, "Dad, I'm just trying to enjoy the gift that you gave me." I would say that, which is such a stupid thing. Don't say that to your parents. I'm trying to enjoy what you gave me, Dad. I'm just trying to use it because you gave it to me. Thank you. So generous. And he was just like, "Oh, I can take that phone right from you because I gave it to you and you're abusing it. So let me just grab it. It's mine now." That didn't happen every day or every week or every month. But I did say that to my dad. It's not great. But I think there's a picture of Ecclesiastes right there. God has given us good gifts. And if you make them more important than they really are, God is offended by that. And that's not what God is trying to do by giving us gifts. So write this down for subpoint B. Don't idolize his gifts, but then also do be thankful to God. Do be thankful to God. He says there's nothing better, verse 24, than you should just find enjoyment in what God has given you. Enjoy the gifts. Be thankful. Be grateful for the gifts that God has given to you. Don't make his gifts more important than they really are. Appreciate them and say thank you for them and be grateful for them. Teenagers are known to be the least grateful people on the planet. I'm just going to tell you that straight up. That's what you guys are known for. Reverse that. Be different than that. Be grateful for the gifts that God has given you. All the way down to your phone in your hand. Be grateful. A couple minutes ago when we were praying for the food and you guys thought it was weird that I prayed that God gave us tongues to taste food. Praising God for the gift of being able to enjoy good things like food. Enjoy a good thing like a nice sunset. Enjoy just a nice fellowship and time together. God, thank you for these gifts that you've given me. James chapter 1 verse 17 says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." God is a good gift giver. Do you recognize him as the good gift giver? Do you thank him? Are you grateful? Are you appreciative of the gifts that God has given to you? God has been so kind to every person in this room. He's put you in a family. He's put you here in Orange County, California. He's given many of you phones, many of you cars, many of you nice homes to live in, nice sports teams to be a part of, that come with nice uniforms, that come with organized schedules, that come with nice equipment. God has blessed you so much. Be appreciative, be thankful, and never elevate those things to be more important than God. Saying, my phone is more important than my parents who gave me the phone. Don't ever reverse the order of the gifts that God has given to us. Joyfully appreciate God's generous gifts. This is how Solomon teaches us to experience life under the sun. It's very weird. It's odd sometimes. Like, what are you saying? But he's telling us, don't make these things your God. Make God your God and thank God for the things that he has given to you. That's how we should be spending our lives under the sun. So let's go to God in prayer right now. We'll hop into small groups here in a second. God, thank you so much for being the good gift giver, for giving us so many things, God, that we do not deserve. God, I want to confess the fact that I do not thank you enough. I do not appreciate the good gifts that you've given to me enough. And so I pray that prayer for every student here in this room, every leader in this room, God, that you would allow us to be grateful and content with what you've given us, not searching for more, not making it our ultimate end to get more stuff, but to thank you and to appreciate what you have given us, God, so that we can glorify you. And God, may we never take your gifts and make them more important than they need to be. But God, we do ask that you would give us wisdom. You not give us earthly wisdom, but you would give us godly wisdom so that we can live lives that are pleasing and honoring and glorifying to you. God, thank you for this reminder tonight, Ecclesiastes. Pray now as we hop into small groups that it would be just a productive time of talking about really what we're living for in this life. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.